The first time an Ottoman army reached the Austrian capital of Vienna was on September 25, 1529. Their arrival signaled the start of a siege that was marked by underground warfare, bad weather, and severe supply issues. Although the Siege of Vienna was brief, it was unquestionably a significant event for all of Europe, because it ended the Ottoman army's perceived invincibility at a time when it was approaching Central Europe more than it had in centuries. This event had extraordinary symbolic power, but it is now eclipsed by the Second Ottoman Siege of Vienna in 1683. In this video, we tell the story of the First Ottoman Siege of Vienna, which was just as spectacular as the second one. As anyone can imagine, it would have made the Ottomans' lives much easier if they had been able to enter the city's gates directly. In 1520, Suleiman, the first rose to the throne of the Ottoman Empire. He followed in the footsteps of his great-grandfather Mehmed II, the conqueror of Constantinople, and soon showed ambitions to expand the realm. In 1521, Suleiman conquered the Hungarian border fortress of Belgrade, and in 1526, he crushingly defeated the Hungarians at the famous Battle of Mohacs. Though after this victory, the Sultan and his army returned home without actively occupying the territory, leaving the defeated Hungarian kingdom to its own devices. Among the many who died in the Battle of, the Hungarian monarch Mohacs had no offspring, although he had made an agreement with the soon-to-be monarch of the Holy Land, Archduke Ferdinand of Austria. According to their arrangement, Ferdinand was to inherit the throne in the Roman Empire of Hungary following Lajos's passing, but not everyone was happy with it. In late 1526, the voivode of Transylvania, János Sopoglia, declared himself King of Hungary, and a month later, Ferdinand did the same. Unable to ignore this disrespect, he sent an army of mercenaries to Hungary in 1527. By early 1528, he had driven his competitor out of the nation. But a catch Sopoglia, who had fled to Poland, offered Suleiman the position of ruler of Hungary. After lengthy negotiations, the Sultan agreed to this welcome proposal, and in 1529, Suleiman and his army marched to Hungary to permanently occupy his latest acquisition. Ferdinand had insisted that Hungary was his warrant, the imperial diet of the Holy Roman Empire, which Suleiman undoubtedly deserved. In exchange, the Sultan would recognize him as King of Hungary and provide military support. Wouldn't stop at the border of the empire, according to the historian Klaus Bitamake. He was constantly looking for help all around Europe, not economizing on richly embroidered horror stories of the merciless Turk ravaging Hungary. But despite his propaganda, most European rulers remained skeptical and thought an invasion of the Holy Roman Empire was impossible. The general opinion was that, after all, Hungary was Ferdinand's own problem. All the imperial diet granted was some money, 20,000 infantrymen and 4,000 horsemen to defend the territory of the border of the empire. These troops were commanded by Frederick I, Count Palatine of the Rhine. When the Ottomans were entering Hungary in summer of 1529, Ferdinand realized that he wouldn't be able to gather enough men in time to put a stop to their movement. He bit the bullet and sent an offer for truce to the Sultan in exchange for annual gifts. All weapons should rest for 10 years. However, Ferdinand's insight came too late, and his offer was way too sparse to sway a man at the head of a marching army. Soon the Ottomans reached the fields of Mohacs, where they held a pompous ceremony. A signal of the Sultan's power to all of Europe, Sopoglia was officially made an Ottoman vassal on this occasion. In early September, they conquered Buda and installed Sopoglia on the throne as their puppet king, then the Ottoman Sultan and his Hungarian patty king. Together, just as Ferdinand had feared, marched along the Danube to Komárom, Győr, and Bratislava. It was soon clear to everyone that indeed the Ottomans were marching for Vienna, and Venice were located on the eastern edge of the Roman Empire at the time, confluence of the Danube and the Veenand, making it well sheltered from the northeast. Although some modifications had been made in the 15th century, there had never been a significant modernization. After Mohacs, the gates were strengthened, but its fortifications were still far from remarkable. The medieval walls were ancient and brittle and lacked any modern bastions. The suburbs were fortified in the summer of 1529 with bulwarks, but according to the Viennese historian Gunther Durigal, this was a, quote, failed attempt to improvise and growth. Most of this new outer line of defense consisted of wooden fences at best, This might stop a cavalry charge as mall walls or wooden palisades were only built near the eastern gates. Because there is no proper map from the city of that time, all we know about the defenses had to be tediously reconstructed from written sources and contemporary depictions. The resulting maps, however, are stored, away in academic literature, and note, easily accessible. This is why some other YouTubers, and even some scholars, made the odd choice of using one of the numerous lighter maps that deceivingly depict a town with bastion, soften even the one of 1683 our map is based on, air construction by two well-known Austrian historians, Walter Hummelberger and Kurt Pabal, to authorities on this topical. Ready in May, Ferdinand had put the military command of the city's defense into the most trusted hands. The hands of the field captain Nicholas Count of Salmon. Seeing the state of the defenses and the few men at his disposal, this experienced warrior fundamentally doubted whether Vienna was defensible. At all, the men were too few, the attackers too many, the defenses in too bad a shape, and the time to change any of these facts too short. Even before Ferdinand, who was residing in Linz, could react to Nicholas's concern, the Ottomans closed in on Vienna. At the time, nobody knew whether the city could resist. The first herald of the Ottoman army, that could be seen by the disgruntled defenders of Vienna, where about 20 to 30,000 akinji, these irregular light cavalry units, prepared the ground for the main army by, according to a mastering, on September 17th, only 400 of the 3,500 residents who were fit for military service remained in Vienna. The rest had already left. By September 20th, no more than 12,000 trained infantrymen and 20,600 cavalrymen garrisoned the town. Some of these troops had been sent by the towns of Austria, but the majority were mercenaries, Hungarians, Germans, and about 700 Spanish arquebusiers. They were greatly outnumbered by the approaching army, which, according to an expert on the Siege of Vienna, numbered about 150,000, of which 100 to 120,000 were fighting men. Once the defenders realized this, they abandoned the large suburbs and burned them down. They then had a number of urgent tasks to complete, including stockpiling, strengthening the walls, and erecting lower walls as a second line of defense behind the most vulnerable southern defenses. In addition, they built wooden artillery platforms behind the walls and unroofed some buildings. For the same purpose, on top of that, they now paid the price for, using the ditch as a garbage dump for. The last decades, it was almost leveled and had to be cleaned out in what had to be very laborious and rather disgusting work, not exactly pleasant too. It must have felt when they had to burn the 28 boats of their flotilla, because they were of no use without their crews. They had fled Vienna as well. The only thing that went right for the defenders at this stage was that the Ottomans were slowed down by heavy rainfalls, which turned the streets towards Vienna into swamps and small riverlets into impassable obstacles. This won the defenders the time they direly needed. Nicholas of Salm knew that the weather was Vienna's best ally. Only continuous rainfall, an early onset of winter, and an Ottoman food shortage combined could weaken the attackers enough or even force them to leave. A lot of rain was quite common at that time of the year, and according to the expert on siege warfare, Christopher Duffy, the Ottoman supply lines were stretched to the breaking point, so Nicholas's hopes were not unrealistic at all. Furthermore, Ferdinand continued to put together a relief army, although it was still unclear if the few men would be able to hold the ancient walls for long enough. Vienna's chances somewhat improved when roughly 5,000 imperial troops and 100 heavy cavalry under Philip the Contentious arrived shortly before the Ottomans closed their grip on the town. But even so, the defenders were still significantly outnumbered and outgunned. The role of Philip has been de-emphasized by scholars over the course of the last years. It was indeed, thanks to his efforts, that a part of the imperial troops reached the city, and he stayed to help in the defense. Voluntarily, according to Gunther du Riegelhay and the Count of Somme were congenial, partners in the defense of Vienna. Meanwhile, Suleiman let the rear of the main army catch up near the river Leita. The advance guard consisted of Sipahai, the professional Ottoman cavalry. They reached Vienna on the 23rd of September on the same day. 500 heavy Austrian cavalrymen set out from the city to weaken the arriving vanguard before it could settle down. They were devastatingly repelled by the Akinji and the Sipahi near the monastery of St. Nicholas, and some of them were taken prisoner. 5 of these prisoners were given gifts and rich clothes in the Ottoman camp, and sent back to Vienna with an appeal For surrender, Vienna left it unanswered. The main Ottoman army arrived on the 25th of September, and one day later, still in pouring rain, the Sultan took up quarters in his opulent tent, near Bastovby. The 27th of September, a sea of Ottoman tents stretched around Vienna, in a wide semicircle closing the city, completely off from the land side. The ring was completed by the Danube flotilla, which had successfully set the 3 bridges over the river on fire, receiving these news. The rest of the imperial troops under Philip's uncle, Frederick, stopped their march for Vienna, and return to Krems-Vienna was cut off completely. The Ottomans quickly installed their batteries and built their siege positions. This was quite easy for them because the defenders had not leveled the suburbs. Completely, some houses and stretches of defenses were even fully intact because the suburbs stretched all the way to the city walls. They provided welcome cover to the attackers to prevent them from taking hold. Nicholas of Soule ordered several sorties on the 27th and 28th of September, respectively. 1,000 infantrymen surprised the Ottomans, who were establishing their positions in the suburbs, and inflicted heavy casualties. A third major attempt on the 29th of September failed, because it was detected dearly. Meanwhile, the Ottoman artillery was thoroughly testing the city walls. However, due to the muddy streets, the Ottomans had been forced to abandon all but 2 of their large guns on the march to Vienna, so that for the most part, they only had small and medium caliber artillery, which was not very effective, not even against the old walls of Vienna. Thus, all they could do was putting up an ongoing barrage at the battlements, and the town itself. The 2 large guns were installed in a battery opposite the Kana Gate, which they tried to breach. Because they observed that their guns were failing, the Ottomans held a council of war on the 1st of October. The plan that the Grand Vizier Ibrahim Pasha, who had led the army as Saroskar, submitted to Suleiman was to focus their attack mainly on their capable miners against the Kantna Gate and the adjoining sections of Woulance. A mine would breach it. Their 20,000 janissaries, the Ottoman elite, infantry, could storm in, and the Sultan agreed. But there was a problem. The ongoing rain, any tunnel or trench was filled quickly with water, which made mining virtually impossible. However, 3 days later, the weather changed. The rain stopped, and the Ottoman workers took to the shovels. The defenders were clueless and still worried about the enemy positions in the suburbs when a Christian defector told them what was going on beneath the ruins. The Ottomans were working on 5 separate mine tunnels. Some quickly recovered from the shocking news, sent listening posts to the cellars, and established assembly places near the Canton Tower. But most importantly, he and Philip ordered additional sorties to destroy the entrances of the tunnels. These were successful at first. But as the janissaries were gaining a better foothold in the suburbs, it became increasingly more difficult to get to the mines. The last and largest of these sorties took place on the 6th of October. Almost half of the defenders set out for the Ottoman positions. But they were discovered early and lost the advantage of initiative. The Ottoman counterattack caught them on the wrong foot, and in no time the sallying force got into this order and retreated. More than 500 of the retreating men were slaughtered when the guards panicked and closed a gate too early. After this, the commander abstained from further sorties. Instead, they deployed a number of Tyrolean miners who happened to be in the city. Those experienced mine workers placed vessels of water near the defenses, which mirrored any convulsion. When they detected a tunnel, they quickly picked up their own tools and dug a counter mine to neutralize the Ottoman mines by destroying them by cleaning out the powder charges or weakening the seal, so that the energy could spread. When 2 groups of miners met in the tunnels, extraordinarily brutal fights ensued. In the muddy darkness underground, only melee weapons could be used, because firearms would have caused the mines to explode, and thus the men stabbed and clapped each other. Dead eye to eye, they wrestled for their lives and those of their brothers above them. The Ottomans were determined to take Vienna quickly, and they were under pressure to do so. Winter was imminent, and discipline and morale in their camp deteriorated quickly. In addition, they feared that Ferdinand or Frederick would arrive with a large relay force. Because of this, they ceaselessly worked to get to the walls. The defenders were trying to prevent exactly that. Couldn't keep them away. On the 9th of October, the first 2 mines exploded west of the Kantna Gate and made 2 breaches of about 25 meters each. The Janissaries immediately advanced and tried to storm it. However, they forgot to attack elsewhere too, so that the defenders could focus all their forces at the two breaches. Their counterattack was led by Count of Saul himself. It was the last time the experienced fighter led his men from the front. He was wounded in the thigh in the dense melee. Despite their leader being wounded, the defenders managed to push the Janissaries back. The ongoing Ottoman artillery fire, the long shifts on guard, and the physical work involved in repairing the defenses, as well as in bearing breaches, were heavily on the defenders and the townspeople who had stayed. The situation deteriorated more and more, until on the 11th of October, they sent a desperate letter to Frederick II, who was still encamped near Kremsquote. From hour to hour, the defenders become fewer and weaker. Please hurry to come to our help, do not wait any longer, end quote. The Ottomans gave the defenders of this time. The Ottomans struck east of the Kana Gate, but the Tyrolean miners had dug venti ducts and cleared the explosives of some tunnels, so the mines were much less effective. The hole they made was about 30 meters wide, but it was not a complete bridge. The top of the wall, including the battlements, remained intact. Nevertheless, the Janissaries attacked this small gate in 3 waves. However, the defenders remained strong, and after a protracted and bloody battle, the ground was covered with bodies. When the last Janissaries withdrew, the defenders counted about 1,000 dead Ottomans in the ditch. This renewed success lifted the spirits of the Vienna residents, who were now confident that they could hold out until a relief army or winter would arrive. The lookout on St. Stephen's Cathedral even reported that he had already seen fire signals on a nearby mountain, the Biesenberg, but the Ottomans weren't finished. The following day, in the middle of the morning, the explosion of several mines east of the Kanatawa announced a third assault, but again, the Turanians had done a good job, so the damage was not too bad, and the infantry and the arquebusiers at the breach could easily repel the attack. The parapets of the most important artillery sites were demolished by the Ottoman cannons at the Kana Tower, forcing them to abandon it, thus diminishing the Vienna's limited firepower. Later that afternoon, the Ottoman miners brought down a section of wall between the defenders had exposed the first 2 breaches west of the tower. Despite their exhaustion, the defenders filled in the bridge as best they could and built new improvised parapets on the destroyed artillery positions. Before the dust settled, 3 columns of attackers were throwing themselves at the breach with their artillery badly weakened and their defenses opened up. It seemed like the Vienna would not be able to hold it off, but somehow the defenders still stood up to the Janissaries, and after a long fight with their last remaining strength repelled them once more. The only possibility was outside assistance, but there was no significant relief army on the ground. Vietnam had survived another day, but Salm and Philip were anything but peaceful and content. How many attacks on this dangerously wide breach could the dwindling numbers of defenders repel? Frederick wasn't on the Bison's Way yet. On the contrary, he was nevertheless encamped at Krems and would stay there until the Ottomans were gone. Vienna was on the verge of breaking. What the defenders didn't know was that the Ottomans were almost as desperate as themselves. According to the historian Klaus Jorgenbrim, the situation in the siege camp worsened from day to day. They had suffered heavy losses in each. Assault morale was low and food was becoming critically scarce. Supply lines were now overstretched, and the foraging troops had to ride ever further to gather the bare minimum of food in the depopulated and plundered hinterland. In addition, the imminent onset of winter and the expected arrival of a relief army hung over the Ottoman tents like dark clouds. Against this backdrop, the Grand Vizier called a council of war. The Ottomans decided that the situation was no longer bearable. It was high time they went all in. The final assault was scheduled for the 14th of October, on the day before the Ottoman camp was busy with industrious movement in plain sight of the defenders. The soldiers prepared themselves. Heralds promised generous gifts, and the Sultan himself inspected the damaged walls, expressing his satisfaction with the progress. Thus far, these open preparations were an adept act of psychological warfare. The Ottomans were proverbially sharpening the executioner's axe, and the defenders, those to be executed, watched in fear. While the sun was rising above St. Stephen's Cathedral, 3 Ottoman attack columns formed up in front of the Cantona Gate. The defenders thought their last hour had come. However, when the first waves of attackers reached the breaches, they were repelled quite easily. This unexpected success is usually explained by the lack of motivation on the side of the Ottoman soldiers especially. The Janissaries? Some sources even claim that they had to be driven forward by their officers by force. Only in the afternoon did the Janissaries seem to have found the defenders were at a major disadvantage due to the white front, so they mobilized all of their reserves, even the heavy cavalrymen, who dismounted and joined the rows of the common infantry. With their last, greatest effort, they braced themselves against what they surely thought would be the last Ottoman way, but they stood their ground, leaving hundreds of bodies at the gates of Vienna. That same evening, the Saraska had to admit that his men had failed, and the Ottomans broke camp on the 16th of October. They massacred those POWs who couldn't be taken away as slaves, killing about 2,000 of them, and then left for the Hungarian border. When the first snowflakes fell from the overcast sky, winter had arrived. Suleiman covered up the humiliating loss of his elite troops and even gave them the rewards promised for a victory. He declared that he would exercise mercy with the people of Vienna because he had discovered that King Ferdinand was not there. He sent messengers to his allies to declare that the campaign had been a success, which was more than a favorable way to put it. Now that everything was over, Frederick and the imperial troops marched to Vienna, and as anyone could imagine, they were welcomed by those who had fought for the city with their own lives on the line. On the morning of October 21st, Frederick and the Council of Vienna. After the war decided to pay and release the men, Frederick's mercenaries demanded payment as if they had taken part in the siege, but their lords were clearly unwilling to pay. The enraged mercenaries then began a riot that lasted for approximately 2 weeks. The victory of Vienna over the Ottoman army wasn't heavily exploited. Initially, some light cavalry pursued the Ottomans and did manage to free multiple groups of prisoners because the imperial troops lacked permission to enter the empire. No one took advantage of the Ottomans' vulnerability. The only action was the occupation of some key strongholds along the eastern border under Nicholas of Somme. Still occupied with this task, the defender of Vienna passed away from the wounds he sustained during the siege half a year later in May of 1530. The question at the heart of this conflict was that Suleiman the Magnificent had secured the power of his vessels and accomplished his primary goal, which was the conquest of Vienna. However, the Sultan had failed in the long run, which was of great importance. The siege of Vienna had been closely watched throughout Europe. When Suleiman's army left the nimbus of invincibility that had followed the Ottoman army everywhere it went, the news of their defeat spread like wildfire, and all of Europe exhaled in relief.